Can't hear you on Zoom. You're online.
Hi. Eyes and ears. I've got continuing the discussion about some of the relationships between sound, moving image.
Can't hear you on Zoom. You're online.
Of talks. Hi. For two pianists in VR. Dr. Gusi Caruso is an artistic researcher, musicologist and professional concert pianist, orientated to a futuristic approach to music performance that connects art and science applications, specifically in projects that combine music, dance and theatre. Bavo van Kerrebroeck's main interests are related to musical interaction and the role of technology. His research is situated in the fields of embodied musical interaction, augmented reality and sonification of movement. He is passionate about and working with motion capture and audio spatializations, to enable and investigate synchronization between musical players using movement and sound. Dr. Pieter and Maes' research is situated in the field of systematic musicology, focusing on embodied and social interactions with music. This research requires a crossover of fundamental music research, including theory formation and experimental research and music application development. The second talk presentation, Towards a Live Synaesthetic Visualization, Considerations on Artistically Visualized Sound by Umut Eldem. Umut is a composer, musician, researcher. After receiving his bachelor's diploma in composition at the Myanmar Synaesthetic Conservatory, he has continued his master's studies at the Royal Conservatoire of Antwerp. In the same institution, he has done his postgraduate research, Foundations of Cross-Modal Analytic Thinking, of the applicability of synesthesia as an interdisciplinary musical concept. He has given lectures on research of synesthesia and has had works combining sound and colours performed in Belgium, Turkey, Italy, Romania, and Luxembourg. The final presentation, unfortunately, the presenter can't be here today for the conversation at the end. Jānis, Garančs, Algorithmic Conflation and Reconfiguration of Audiovisual Space and Movement in the series of experiments with financial data, Audio-Visualisations as Immersive Artworks. Initially trained in classical arts, he primarily works in technological and algorithmic art genres, interactive multimedia installations and performances, and virtual reality. Since the year 2000, JG focuses on stereoscopic imagery, immersive 3D sound, and combination of complex programmed algorithmic structures with spontaneous gestures and live improvisation on stage. He has exhibited and presented his work internationally at venues and events including Asia Electronica, DF, Rotterdam, and many, many others. So it's my pleasure to roll the first of these presentations, Piano Phase for VR, or for two pianists in VR.
Good afternoon, and thanks to the organization for this space in this expanded animation symposium. I'm very pleased to introduce you the project Piano Phase for two pianists in VR, co-developed with Bavo van Kerrebroeck under the supervision of Dr. Pieter Jan Maes at IBEM, the Institute of Psychoacoustic and Electronic Music, Ghent University. I'm Gusi Caruso, concert pianist and postdoc researcher affiliated to IBEM. This project project was carrying on within the IPEM research on musical interaction, mediation technology, and immersive music performance in VR. The artistic and scientific objectives and perspectives of this project consist of the use of technology in music performance practice and music performance analysis, and also the creation of immersive music performances in VR and investigation of the process of interaction and synchronization between musicians and between musicians and technology. This project derives from my artistic PhD, where there was introduced the use of technology, the motion capture technology as an augmented mirror to analyze, monitor, and map gestures in piano performance. So this idea of technology-enhanced mirror, a method to assist performers in their artistic process. Then this project was developed in collaboration with LVT3 Society in Milano and becomes a multimedia performance called Avatar Piano Project and My Avatar and Me. I performed within the motion capture system that capture my gestures in real time, creating an avatar projected on a screen to augment the perception and visualization of my gestures while playing. We can look at some images now. The next step was to create a multimedia performance where I can interact with my avatar while playing. So we choose as case study the reinterpretation of the composition Piano Phase for Two Pianists by the composer Steve Reich. This piece is based on the process of phasing and dephasing of two pianists playing a repetitive melodic pattern in phase and then out of phase, in sync and out of sync. So the first pianist starts playing this melodic pattern and for several bars, and then the second pianist starts playing the same pattern in sync, and after the composer asks the second pianist to accelerate the tempo, and so to go to the phase and go to the other after several bars to another bar where the two pianists are on phase, but the second pianist play the second note of the pattern and then again accelerate in the second part and then again in phase. So the idea was to simulate this experience of phase and shift of phase with a real pianist and a virtual pianist in VR. And from this perspective, so we want to analyze the artistic research questions that are from the artistic perspective, concerns how does the impact of technology modify and renovate the aesthetic and creative approach to music performance. And from the performer's perspective, to what extent does the interaction with cutting-edge technology affect performance musical expression? And from the audience perspective, how can technological and immersive musical experience enhance the communication of music and engagement of the contemporary audience? Yes. So this project is now a work in progress, and from the artistic part, we are investigating my personal experience and musical engagement as a pianist researcher in practicing and performing with the real pianist and a virtual counterpart in virtual reality. But besides, there is also an empirical experimentation by my colleague Bavo van Kerrebroeck on the musical interaction of other pianist participants performing in VR. So the steps of this performance project concerns a demo where I performed with the motion capture system to create an animation of two pianists playing in virtual reality. And I performed the piano phases acceleration part on a pre-recorded stable part that follows my acceleration towards states of phasing and dephasing. So now we can look at some images. Then, in July-August 2020, my colleague Bavo van Kerrebroeck conducted an empirical experiment with the multiple pianists. And now we are working on a performance in VR that will be presented in Hamburg in November 2020. So now I let my colleagues to explain the technological setup and the procedures and protocols of these empirical experiments. And I thank you for your attention.
So hello, my name is Bavo van Kerrebroeck and I'm a PhD candidate at EPAM, as mentioned by my colleague Jussi Caruso. And I will talk a bit about the scientific part of our piano phase project. I called it for this symposia Simulated Reality, a Musical Interaction in VR. The basic problem that we started from to do some research and scientific research arises mainly from the difficulty of making observations to do research, observations in a real setting that often have a high amount of variability, which can lead to suboptimal measurements, or doing observations in a lab condition, which are overly controlled and have a strong subjective bias by the researcher that tries to simulate reality to some extent. So in our case, we propose the use of augmented and virtual reality to create contexts, virtual scenarios to simulate reality in which we can do controlled but ecologically valid research. And this all to go deeper, get more insight into the underlying fundamental principles and also to uncover new ways for expression and creativity. Before we can embark on this project, first, we need to answer a big question, which is to what extent we can simulate a musical interaction. To answer this question, obviously you start from a musical interaction. And as introduced by my colleague before, we took the piece Piano Phase, composed by Steve Reich. And so we start from two pianists who are playing the piano together, doing this piece. And I will show you on the next video a brief introduction on how such interaction is set up. So I guess a lot of you know the Unity program. I developed a virtual scenario there, obviously in our lab settings, starting from a piano. I really liked the cameras on front of the HTC Vive that I used for this, because they allow to align the real and virtual quite easily onto each other. Next, I use a leap motion that I attach to the headset to give the pianist some virtual hands. Obviously very difficult in terms of alignment, and making a sort of interactive piano to get the action perception closely together and really induce a feeling of presence to the player in VR. This is how such a scientific setting in which the two pianists are playing together looks. You can see the participant with the headset on to the left. And if we start the video, you will see the two pianists playing the actual piece. And we used motion capture to project skeletons, extract their movement information, both to do data analysis afterwards, but also to embody the players in VR. And then the next slide shows the three different conditions. So this is through the eyes of the participant, the player that I'm observing to see how he or she is interacting and playing in the first condition in reality. So he or she sees the other pianist through the cameras in front of the headset and just plays the piece as it is. The second condition, the other pianist is embodying a virtual person, an avatar, and the participant is interacting, playing with this virtual person, the same piece for about 6 or 7 minutes, and going through all these phases of synchrony and desynchrony over the course of the piece. And finally, in the third condition, there is no other player, and the pianist is only playing with a virtual agent, not controlled in real time by an actual pianist behind, but by a Kerrebroeck algorithm that's dynamically updating the phase of the pianist playing the piece. Now, if you have these three conditions, you have real, virtual, and virtual data of these pianists playing together. We try to come up with a model to evaluate these different conditions and compare the musical interaction in a real and virtual condition, and to what extent some aspects of the experience remain the same. So on the first layer, it's really related to the experience, the subjective feeling. And key components in this first layer are the presence flow, arousal measured by pupil data, and also aesthetic judgment, asking them to judge short excerpts after playing the piece. On a behavioral level, we look at movement and also the leading following roles that both of them are taking, and if they remain somehow the same or different over these conditions. And at the lowest level, looking really at the musical output, the timing of the notes, the amounts of synchronization, the structure spread over the piece, and again looking at the similarities and differences in these conditions to answer the basic question: can we simulate reality? To what extent can we simulate a real musical interaction? I will now close my part with a short video that will show the setup of how we came up with the whole experiment, and also shows the different steps over thing, and then show you 2 short videos. So as my colleague has said just before, this video showed the setup of this demo that we had in November last year, a more creative, public demo-like virtual environment. For the research purposes, a different setting was chosen that you saw in the previous videos. Finally, I have 2 little other videos to show you. Another, we made some 360 videos of also more creative setting of the piano phase of our project. And this video is somewhere on YouTube and makes it easy to distribute it also to a wider audience. On the one is more a creative one, and on the other side, a first-person perspective to a listener, so he can somehow embody and have the piano phase experience or something like that in VR using a cardboard or things like that.
Hi, I'm Umut Eldem. I am a musician, a composer, and a researcher. Currently, I'm doing my PhD studies in the Royal Conservatory of Antwerp and the University of Antwerp in Belgium. In this presentation that I named Live Synaesthetic Visualization, Considerations in Artistically Visualized Sound, I will give a brief overview of audio visualization in visual music, categorize the different approaches of audio visualization, and talk about how live audio visualization can benefit from using the synesthetic and cognitive syntax in order to create a deeper link to audiovisual perception. To go into this, we need to talk a bit about visual music. The concept of visual music is founded on the fact that we experience the world in audiovisual terms. Visual music is in fact visual art that is informed and inspired by the elements of music. It is a paintings or animation that is designed to reflect qualities of music or somehow transform the experience of music with the addition of an extra sensory information. We can see these concepts in both popular and art musical performances. For example, the use of lights, lasers, projection, music videos that follow the elements of music. They take one or more musical element and express it visually to draw attention to it and add a new dimension to the whole experience. A more direct example in relation to animation is the works of Oskar Fischinger, Viking Egeling, and Walter Rutten. As pioneers of music videos, visualized music, they animated well-known musical pieces, creating abstract animated shapes dancing, moving around, changing colors. Fischinger himself tells it in the beginning of his work, An Optical Poem. To most of us, music suggests definite mental images of form and color. 28 years before, in 1910, the composer Alexander Scriabin composed this piece, Prometheus, the Poem of Fire, with a similar idea. A color organ, as he called it, was to give out specific colored lights based on the ever-changing tonality of the piece. Scriabin notated a color organ part, like any other instrument in the orchestra. The colors he chose was in turn informed by his pseudo-synesthesia, colors for each note that he, for himself, quote-unquote, logically deduced, which then he added to his performance, of course. Such artistic connections between color and music is something we see often in people experiencing audiovisual synesthesia. Audiovisual synesthetes have associations of colors and visuals with music or sound. This experience allows them to intuitively express this connection, especially in visual art, where they can put them on a canvas or an animation frame. And the idea of a color organ came even before Scriabin, as Alexander Wallace Remington unveiled his color organ in 1893, an instrument that put out electrical colored light instead of notes. And even before that, in 1725, Louis Bertrand Castel introduced his ocular harpsichord that used colored glass to give a color to each note. Castel claimed that even a deaf listener could enjoy music when it was painted by colors. For him, this color music was the lost language of paradise, where all people could understand each other. While this lost language of paradise is a pretty big claim, humanity has gotten very proficient with the help of the ever-developing technology to create and bind together intricate visuals and music. And here let us pay special attention to animated visual music. Animated visual music has the potential of creating a multi-sensorial experience like no other. The reason is simple. It gives visual art a dimension it lacked and a dimension music has: time. By making visual events appear and disappear at the same time as musical events, our cognition immediately maps these two events together, creating the illusion of one causing the other or one being very strongly related with the other. In this frame of visual music, we can consider these two polarities in which the creation process exists. Most animations are created after the music. The animator takes a musical recording and creates a visual narrative to go along with it. The previously mentioned works of Oskar Fischinger and his friends fall into this camp. Another example of this kind of animation is the YouTube channel Smolin, created by the musician and software engineer Stefan Malinowski. Malinowski uses a software he developed, the Music Animation Machine, that creates such visualizations from MIDI files, which he then overlays with a higher quality recording of the piece. By giving special attention to melodic lines, timbre and durations, by using different colors, lines and shapes to mark them, the videos created by Smolin is a pleasure to watch, to say the least. In fact, it is impressive that the channel currently has 190,000 subscribers, which is not very common on YouTube channels that exclusively upload recordings of classical music. On the other end of the spectrum is animation created not after the fact, but during. This is better known as audio-reactive visuals. The shapes, colors, and lines on the screen change and move according to a live input from the microphone or the live audio feed. Maybe the most famous example for this generation is the visualizers of media players. For example, Winamp is or was also known for its audio visualization engine. This kind of visualization nowadays have many modern variants, making use of the greater processing power and the equipment to deliver almost psychedelic-like experiences. Maybe this is why it's no big surprise that these kinds of visuals are usually aligned with techno, EDM, and club genres of music. Still, all genres of music can and do use such visualizations. For example, Floating Lines, a work by Giuseppe Acito, has designed his audio-reactive light sculpture in a way that reacts with different colors to create different ranges of sound frequencies, with which he claims to create a synaesthetic experience of motion, colors, and sound visualization. And this brings me to the point which I call the live visualization problem. There is clearly a division of style between animation that is prepared beforehand and one that is generated real-time. The precise techniques to create the visual music can land at any point on the spectrum, even in the middle, but the styles are still very much polarized. Pre-made visualizations have the advantage of being closer to the musical syntax. The animator has the possibility of not only animating individual beats or the notes, but also the melody, the recurring themes, the atmosphere, different timbres, instruments, and the reflection of movements and gestures in the music. This is in contrast with most live visualizations, which has a visual component that is not live but designed to reflect the music. And the movement in time is synchronized live with the beats, the loudness, the range of the harmonic velocity. In some cases, this leaves more to be desired in the manner of connection to the musical syntax that the audience is experiencing at that very moment. Something very important to keep in mind at this moment is that being more connected to the music does not necessarily make an audiovisual work better or more pleasurable nor more aesthetic. All of the works I mentioned, even the Winamp visualizer, have enjoyed a degree of success, and they are, in my opinion, well-crafted visual music. In fact, that is the strongest feature of live visualization. Gestures can be and are reflected in real time as a reaction. In the case of a performer or any kind of live audio feed, the dimension of time is kept connected as closely as possible, creating the means to reflect the gestures, the moment-to-moment occurrences of the music. The matter here is that of possibility, the possibility of expression. So would it be possible to create a live visualization system that has a stronger connection to the audio input? Would it be possible to go further than beats and harmonic frequencies? Is a live visualization that reflects the further syntax of the music possible in real time? I believe that by referring to the synaesthetic syntax and the collective cross-model experiences, we can find the key in answering these questions. So let's talk about giving vision to notes. To understand this problem more clearly, let's consider in which ways we visualize music. As you know, music cognitions across all cultures is made out of timbre, rhythm, and the distinction between pitched and non-pitched sounds. It's the organization of these elements that create and shape the musical experience. Indeed, when we look at the experiences of audiovisual synesthetes, we see that visual ideas are mapped onto one or more of these elements. For some, each note becomes a color. For others, each instrument has its own color. And for some, the non-pitched timbre suggests a visual texture, and so on and so forth. So we can make the claim that we are mapping learned distinction of one senses like named colors, named textures, to the other, like note names, instrument sounds, as a point of departure. So consider a short musical phrase. It can be possible to visualize this by giving each note its own unique color, and then we get a quote-unquote audiovisual experience. This, however, does not completely reflect the syntactic qualities of the fragment. How could you possibly express the shape of the melody, the points of the phrase, by just the use of colors? And let's also think of the rhythmic patterns and harmony. This fragment may be part of an orchestra with the combinations of instruments creating different timbral combinations. This clearly gets out of hand fairly quick. The issue here is that musical syntax has an emergent quality. It is not just the individual units of musical cognition that create the experience, but the relationships between them. The combination of notes create the harmony. The change of harmony creates a harmonic progression. The rhythmic cells create a sense of speed, etc. And yet, these elements affect each other as well. The harmony affects the perception of melody. The rhythm affects the perception of harmony. The organization of these elements over time affects the perception of atmosphere and musical form. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I am not even going into non-Western and contemporary musical structures. In any case, the emerging web is complex, it is extremely interconnected, and yet it is intuitively grasped and understood by our cognition. If we are looking for live visualization that is based on our cognitive syntax, or a live visualization that can reflect this emergent quality of music, then we need to focus on this web of connections. We need to reflect this emergent property in the visualization itself. That is, of course, a challenge, as an event happening live does not leave too much time to consider how this current musical object relates to what came before. And it is exactly here that the synaesthetic syntax can help. Instead of trying to recreate this almost too complex set of relationships, we can instead give each musical building block a different visual building block. This is, in fact, something that was done recently by the pianist Agustin Muriago and the programmer Leif Ellis. Muriago's performance of Scriabin etudes were in real time transformed into visuals projected on the piano, of course according to the color associations of the composer Scriabin. I believe that this is the way to go when we are thinking about live visualization. The notes, the gestures of the music, the gestures of the musician should lead to the creation of visuals and also reflect the syntax of the musical work. And new musical audio-visual works are possible by extending this understanding of synaesthetic visualization. Think of it like this. A sound event contains a timbre profile, a loudness, direction, and an effect in relation to what comes before and after. If it's a pitch sound, it also contains a note, a harmonic context. All of these elements can be given a visual property separately. For example, giving each note a unique color, changing the brightness and the shape according to its spectral profile, and then giving it movement and position according to what comes before and after, will create a multi-modal visual object, and it will create a multi-dimensional link to the sound source itself. The synaesthetic syntax becomes a valuable tool in understanding exactly which visual and oral combinations make sense to our own cognition. Theoretically, any elements of one sense can be mapped onto the other. However, we are drawn to certain mappings in our cognition. In audiovisual synesthesia, for example, The experience of colors are most often mapped to pitched material notes, key tonalities, pitch groupings, and so on. We see a further similarity in color qualities between synesthetes and non-synesthetes. Higher tones become brighter, lower tones become darker. The brightness also correlates with the volume of an incoming sound, which in turn informs the size of the object. The timbral profile of the sound creates the feeling of texture, the shape of the visual association, and in some cases it affects the color as well. Now let me underline this here, this is very important. These associations manifest themselves in different variation in synesthetes. Each synesthetic experience is in fact different. But looking at the majority and the consistency of synesthetic experience, we begin seeing the parallels in cross-model associations the general public makes. And it is this connection between the experience of synesthesia and cross-model associations that is well documented. Synesthetic animations, animations that express the experience of synesthesia, is shown to be more perceived as pleasing, fitting to the general populace. The connection is further supported by the consistency of cross-model associations that are synesthesia-like, louder being bigger, higher pitched being brighter, etc. The movement and orientation of the sound is perhaps the strongest, as they have a one-to-one equivalency in visual movement and orientation. So then let us take these equivalencies as the building blocks of live visualization. This way, not only the visualization would reflect our cognitive multisensorial experience, but it would also do something inside the music, the change of harmony, the melody, the form, the timbre. They would all have an automatic visual response that keeps the same structures. Now, of course, a catch-all solution is not possible. The artist needs to think which elements the current musical piece is using and then to craft the visual building blocks according to that property. For example, a piece featuring a non-pitched percussive ensemble will not benefit from giving colors to the notes. The visualization still has to be considered on a per-case basis. This also lets the artist give a character, a further narrative to the visuals while still keeping the emergent property intact. These visualizations can be floating dots, they can be connected geometric shapes, they can be fractals, heck, they can even be household objects moving together. Anything is feasible as long as it keeps the interconnected building blocks. It is the resulting audio-reactive world that will link to the musical experience and also give it meaning. The good thing is that the technology to create such live audio-reactive visuals is not something of the future. We are not limited to using MIDI keyboards to trigger lights. Audio real-time pitch tracking, spectral analysis, harmonic analysis, rhythmical analysis, these are all possible and are tools that are already being used. A possible challenge is the detection of polyphonic texture, polyphonic instruments, which I believe can be solved by the use of contact microphones and a visual camera input of the performer to track the musical gestures visually. I believe that this way it's possible to have a visual system react to a live input and also to have a more active connection to the musical syntax. In my recent works, I have experimented with the basics of this idea in order to explore this concept. My work, Glimmer for saxophone, uses live visualization to connect the musical gestures into different colors, shapes, and shimmering. So each note receives a unique color, the shape grows, moves, and distorts based on the timbre and the movement of the music itself. As the piece is based on the act of breathing, the visuals move with the breath of the music, creating an intimate connection with the musician, who is the true source of both the sound and the visuals themselves. Another experiment was done during quarantine. With fellow researchers from the Royal Conservatory of Antwerp, we did what I called a color jam. I would use a keyboard to musically generate visuals, different shapes and textures with unique colors. The others then would react live to these visuals, starting from an agreed upon rule like green is the note E, and then filling in the rest by improvising as different colors and shapes appeared. This led to us discovering our own associations and how instant and unique a musical reaction could be against a visual input. A final and perhaps the most fascinating is working together with synesthetes to visualize their synesthesia as a part of a new audiovisual work. For this, I'm working with multiple audiovisual synesthetes who are also musicians. What we do is we work together to construct their synesthetic experience digitally, be it just colors for notes, colors for different instruments, or certain shapes and movements. I developed this into a new work for that person's instrument with an expanded musical and visual palette. What I found is that this technique of synesthetic visualization, this emergent approach to visuals, makes it very intuitive to work together with synesthetes, both visualizing their visions and taking the visual component further while staying true to the synesthete's own unique experience. Currently, I am writing a series of pieces for the harpsichord with generated visuals that are in accordance with the harpsichordist's own synesthesia. So I turn her colors for each note into pretty much a visual and musical narrative. All in all, this approach of synesthetic visualization may look simple on the surface, but it provides something live visualization sometimes lacks: an expanded narrative power and the visualization of the musical syntax. I will be developing these experiments and techniques further into more and more intricate works, which I hope will explore our cognitive world in new and exciting ways. After all, at least for me, that is one of the strongest features of the audiovisual arts. Thank you for watching.
Okay. So, welcome to this panel discussion where we can sort of interrogate the authors of these papers. We've had a few comments coming in on the YouTube chat, so please carry on doing that and I'll try to relay them forwards. But I thought I'd start by just pointing out some of the obvious similarities and obvious differences so that we can get into some of the wider concepts and approaches. So clearly both these projects are going from the idea of visualizing sound as the primary direction of travel rather than the audioization of imagery. But they're very different in another aspect, which is the sort of primacy of the synaesthetic color-tone relationships and harmonic material in Umut's presentation and consequent work, and the primacy of rhythmic structure in piano phase and the gestures associated with those two things. So there's some overarching similarities and some stark differences in those things. But one question I'd like to sort of start with related to piano phase in VR was the strong relationship between the technical challenges and the choice of piano phase in Steve Reich and a piece of music which is procedural in its nature. That seems like a fundamental decision that must have come quite early on. How did you reach that, and what challenges did that choice give you? need to unmute a little bit, Gusi. Yep.
Now can you hear me? Yeah, right? Yes. So yeah, indeed, we choose piano phase because the challenge of this piece is to study with a partner, so with another pianist, and to see how two pianists react while playing together the similar pattern. So the interaction, then the synchronization, the phasing and the dephasing. And in studying also the interaction by human and machine, there is also this challenge to find good synchronization and part of phasing and dephasing. So this was the challenge of this, and also why we used piano phase as a repertory. Because there, in virtual reality, me, but also the participants at the experiment made by Bavo, we could see how the musical expressivity is important and the visualization of gestures while playing this kind of repertoire. Because the pianist was asked, and me as well, also to perform and practice with only with an audio recording. But there you really miss the musical interaction, the embodied musical interaction. So you can use technology, the audio, for example, the audio track to prepare the piece, to memorize, for example, the different pattern to play together. But then in performance, you need a real embodied interaction and visualization of the bodies of the two performances, so the two performers. So when I played, for example, as a participant of the experiment in the Bavo empirical experiment, I could experiment how it was different to play in VR with a real pianist, but also with an avatar that can act as an agent. But you see the limitation of technology is this, that it missed the thing that is missed is the musical expressivity. So you have also the interaction needs a sort of train with an avatar, I mean, with a technological avatar. And so there is also this challenge in technology. So there is a challenge in the musical engagement with an avatar, and also to see how a normal pianist, I mean, a person can react with an agent, with a virtual agent. So how this can be done in virtual reality, actually. So technology is used as to see the limitation, but also the potentialities, because, for example, the avatar can be used to practice the piece, actually. So this is also one of the purposes of this study, to see how the potentialities of technology also to improve, in my case, piano practicing or music practice in general. And then there is also the visualization, so the image that we can project, and we can augment also the perception of this piece, and to see how the public is more engaged in this kind of virtual and immersive experiences.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think maybe I could just sort of take one of those ideas, which is to do with synchronization, and how maybe Bavo, you could come in with this. The idea of synchronizing to an audio stimulus on its own, which of course, you know, if you think about things like conversations with myself, Bill Evans, you know, there's a history in piano music of doing this, and of course there's four hands, one piano, and so on. But building in a virtual agent and synchronizing with that, what was the conversation like in terms of trying to remove some of the barriers that you artificially imposed upon yourself? And I'm thinking, were there things to do with the hands and the eyes and gesture in particular, as well as just the try to reduce the latency in the system and that sort of thing, but really maybe some of the more human elements and those challenges that you faced?
I could talk for half an hour about the latencies. I will not do that, but I mean, integrating all these different systems, that's a big challenge. But back to the synchronization is linked to your first question about the choice for the piano phase for this piece. because it looks at a superficial level quite simple. It's 12 notes that get repeated and then procedurally get accelerated. So the choice for this piece was also informed by that. You have these moments of synchronization and desynchronization, chaos versus structure, let's say. And what Jussi was saying also, it's about human contact also in a way. We got it from the last participants in the experiment, that they mentioned, yeah, in the condition playing with a virtual avatar controlled by a person, you have human contact, you have dynamics going on, and also mirroring of movement towards each other. The virtual agent not controlled, I used a mathematical model, a dynamical oscillator, if you want, for especially it's a Kuramoto model that dynamically interacts, accelerates, and slows down based on the playing phase of the other pianist. We did a recording in the beginning of this year with Jussi and another pianist playing the piece in full, where we recorded animations of them playing all their movement data. And then I used these animation data, the audio and the visual, to accelerate and decelerate based on this dynamical model and sort of interact. Audio, like on first sight, I haven't analyzed all the data yet, but at first sight, musically and audio-wise, I think the result is actually as written, and it's quite interactive, and you have some dynamics in the purely virtual piece. But what you have lacking was actually the enjoyment of the player. With the virtual agent, the pianist was almost, I wouldn't say not indifferent, like she was playing with a sort of indifferent player, because in the second condition, playing with the virtual avatar controlled by an actual pianist, there was actually a conversation, like you say, ongoing, which even though there was accelerations, decelerations by the algorithm, there was no mirroring, there were no surprises. It was a lot more challenging. So to put it simply, there was interaction, synchronization, desynchronization, but yeah, of course, human contact. This was also the question: to what extent can we simulate this musical interaction, and what are the elements that are left, yeah, so far to some extent unexplainable or to be left to be discovered? So
just to pass this over to Umut a little bit with the idea of expectation. You know, piano phase is a procedural piece. The expectation of what's going to happen musically is set up early on, and it's very clear. But you cited Fishinger's 1930s visualizations, and of course they were well-known pieces, and therefore there's an expectation in the audience. In your work, you're playing much more with the audience perception of expectation and synchronization. Can you maybe give some examples in your own experiments about times that you felt that worked particularly successfully, or that you felt that there was a tension between trying to synchronize the visual aspects and the sound? You know, just a little.
Yeah. I mean, now the biggest challenge when you're trying to visualize sound is it is something personal. I mean, at its core, synesthesia, the thing that we are investigating here, is something that is very personal, right? Everyone has their own colors, shapes. Some people just experience taste, for example, instead of just seeing colors. And synesthesia as an umbrella term means something entirely different. So ironically, in these works and workshops and activities I have done, I have had synesthetic people come at me and say, Umut, these are the wrong colors. You're doing the wrong colors, and these are not right at all. So there is a question of inclusivity there, that a bit of the irony of creating something out of synesthesia that might exclude some synesthetic people. So to kind of overcome that, the direction I'm going now with my research is to ask the audience for their input live during a performance. For example, consider a music performance where the audience is using a smartphone app to say which colors they are associating the music real time, which can then, during the performance, might be a part of the visualization itself. And I think that is the way to go in understanding this visualization's personal nature, and allowing the audience, allowing the person to be able to interact with the visualization process itself, to be able to put that personal mark in visualization.
In both works, you know, the audience were clearly considered, you know, how to have a shared space with two pianos, and then also the interaction of sometimes nostalgic sort of approach to experiencing two-dimensional visualizations of sound. Maybe we can just kind of have a little chat around why what can we do to share these sort of virtual spaces, and this maybe that somewhere there's a continuum between abstraction and you know, something concrete between these two works. That you know, we could discuss. You know, in some terms, you know, there's a very concrete element to the piano work, and there's a very abstract element to, and flexibility therefore in your work, Umut. Is there something maybe that both these projects could pick some change in these directions? Agusi, as a pianist, you're working in both these areas of abstraction and the concrete. Maybe just a few thoughts of your own on that would be interesting.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, the two projects are based on this idea of augment the visualization of music in a way. So interaction between gestures, between images, between colors. But if you think, actually, this idea comes from the past. For example, in music, the program music of Liszt, Berlioz, we have this association between something from nature, for example, and sound. And also, I mean, the colors were studied by Olivier Messiaen. So the idea of synesthesia in music, how chords, some clusters can recall different amount of colors. And then the audience was challenged to imagine. So it was much more a sort of active hearing. Now, for the society that this is the society of images, the audience, especially in contemporary music, needs also to visualize something, to imagine, but also to visualize, because especially contemporary music that is very abstract. Sometimes my friends that are not very used to hear contemporary music, they ask me, but what we can imagine by hearing this kind of music that is very abstract, we cannot understand the language. But with the images, we can give some input to the audience to understand better. So it is also an aesthetic challenge for musicians to use technology in a creative way, and it's not only a sort of didactic way to use technology. Like, for example, we use colors for children to give some ideas, images at the beginning. They can use some pattern and then use some colors and imagine something unrelated, something. For example, when I do some workshop for children, I'm used to compare the glissando with the wind, for example, and they can recognize immediately what the music can mean, but because they need some input. So I think that this project can come from this idea also to use technology in a creative way, to use contemporary music to give some other messages than the music, but not because the music is limited, because it's now a new code that you have to generate other code, multimedia code, to be understandable. I don't know, Umut, maybe he can add something, and also Bavo then on this idea.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely something interesting in how we are kind of reversing this historical process, because in Messiaen, Scriabin, whoever came before, there is this assertion that this note is this color, I'm seeing these colors with these chords, and you are going to experience this. Whereas what we are doing is more of an invitation in discovering the music, trying to make it more accessible, because you're right, Jussi, especially in contemporary circumstances, it is not very accessible. People are not used to hearing and processing that kind of musical syntax. And what we do is maybe not asserting that there must be this visual equivalence between what's going on musically and what can be visually, but inviting them to discover which color might that be? Which shape might that be? Might there be some movements? And just by thinking, just by creating this equivalency inside their heads, I think people find it easier to relate with the music that is going on.
I really like this idea of using it as a way to educate audiences into the expectations of contemporary music in particular. There's a few assumptions as well, which I think might be worth discussing where they come from. You mentioned, Umut, that there are some underlying principles to do with brightness and pitch and this sort of thing. But there's also, in some of the visualizations that you showed, a left-right bias for time or a forward momentum for time, which obviously are culturally sort of created things, rather than perhaps it'd be interesting to know where brightness comes from, how much of that is cultural or how much of that perhaps is innate.
I mean, that is the question, isn't it? How much of this is cultural and how much is maybe coded in our genetics? And the left-right thing, you're absolutely right. It is most likely because in most Western cultures, we are used to reading from left to right. So we tend to experience these visualizations in that way. But in the case of brightness, consider this: no matter where you are on the earth during the day, if you look up, you're going to see the sun. And this might be ingrained in our global consciousness in a way that we expect bright things to be placed above. But that is one thing to be careful of, especially when we are talking about the musical context, which is a Western musical context here, that these things might be applicable in global circumstances if they're applicable to the global musical circumstances, because an Indian musician dealing with sargam, solfege notation, for example, will have to come up with much different rules or ways of visualization than what we are doing right now. And that is something to always keep in mind. Yeah.
Another thing which is very common in musical performance is, our ability to allow our hands to become an extension of ourselves. And I was interested in how what the experience was like to perform a piano without particular types of feedback into your hands, and is there a way that we can translate some of that feeling to an audience? Because it was mentioned in an earlier discussion that most people have that experience with a pen as an extension of the hand, but through training the entire piano becomes that. Is there an opportunity through these kinds of technological mediations to share that experience with an audience, or is that maybe is that
maybe like for the last final video in the presentation, it was a 360 video. So what we did was on the headset of the pianist, you have two cameras in front that record the environment, and we recorded like a 6-cube map of the video. So you get a 360 video that then afterwards can be experienced by the audience. So the last video, and even since it's on YouTube, it's like widely accessible. A public let's not give teenager cardboards, but I mean anyone can take this and through their smartphone have the sort of embodiment, the experience of the pianist playing the piece. In the setting of Piano Phase, it was quite rudimentary, with just one extra pianist playing with you, but it could be extended to other places, being part of orchestra, embodying the role of a musician in another context. And by this 360 video, you don't have the actual tactile feedback, it's only visual. You can look around, but it's let's say a start towards, and it's in a case an experience of the musical performance.
Yeah, I think the hands in VR are a very important thing. It does seem to be substantially different when you can even have rudimentary hand controllers into a space in terms of your sort of experience of being embodied within it. So I mean, we're early days with these things, and it's exciting. It's also, I think, you mentioned that it's simulating a virtual musical interaction, and it's quite it's quite an empirical bit of research that is connected to a subjective artistic one. What is it about the particular musical insights, or rather, what's unique to a musical interaction that can give us greater insights than another sort of interaction? Because I have a sort of hunch that sometimes music will be a way to accelerate empirical research in these.
Yeah.
What
very widely. So like a lot of people are attracted to the musicology domain, from neuroscience to psychology to mathematics to physics to acoustic. I'm an engineer by background and doing this. So it attracts a lot of people, and it's a big question that you're asking, why is music interesting for all these people? But yeah, music has a lot of obviously effects, both emotional, physiological, psychological, and especially when you put it in interaction, you get dynamics, behaviors that are that can be found in other places in reality. For this particular case in piano phase, the synchronization, the interaction, and the subjective experience of flow. And this morning it was Alexander, I forgot his name, Ulchek or something, sorry. I was talking about the concept of presence. This is also a big research question in our project. The concept of presence, of inducing a sort of presence in this virtual environment. And musical interactions obviously influence your concept of presence. Think of watching a concert in an audience or in a screen, or playing it yourself. The subjective feeling of being somewhere varies, and in a musical interaction, there are a lot of, yeah, like I said, emotional, physiological, dynamical things that are happening that are interesting for fundamental reasons in human conversation, and they can be extended in different routes, let's say.
Yeah,
I also do think that there is something fundamentally different about how we hear things, as in how we see things, smell things, taste things, that maybe we are able to pick out patterns, experience patterns in a profoundly different way. So it's really hard to replace the musical experience with something else. We can augment it with the visual experience, but there can be no visual music that is just visuals and makes us say, okay, now I feel like I have listened to Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. I don't need to even listen to it. I have seen it all. That is simply not possible, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a certain audiation that we can get some sort of proxy for it, but we don't experience it in time in the same way.
Yeah.
I think this concept that listening is fundamentally different in terms of how we create a sort of the gestalt, the whole experience. And I think in both these ideas, there's a bit of a conflict sometimes between when we are experiencing something new. I wonder how much our brain is able to put them together as a single experience, and maybe repetition is part of that. I think that we just to sort of try to draw this conversation, unfortunately, to a little bit of some sort of conclusions. I think I'd like to know where your most ambitious self sees your projects and also the whole field going. If budget was not an issue and time wasn't an issue, and governments and audiences were sort of prioritizing synesthetic sound, gesture, music research, how far could this be taken? Umut, where would you go with an unlimited check and research group?
Well, Harry, I'm going to repeat what you just said with VR. I think we're at the beginning of something that is going to develop into some really interesting things. And I would be interested in adding on other senses, realizing the other sensorial experiences too, because I said it a few minutes ago, synesthesia is an umbrella term. It is not just audio and visuals, but it's also touch, it's smell, it's taste. And that is maybe something that was foreshadowed by Scriabin 100 years ago when he was talking about the ecstasy of the senses. He even was working on a piece that would combine all of those, bring about the end of the world, he called it. before he passed away. So maybe technologically the time is right to head into that direction again, to have more, sensually complete artistic experiences.
Great. And
I totally agree with Umut in this sense, and piano phase is what, I mean, it is one of the challenge of to use technology in a creative way and to see how we can potentiate the visualization and not only listening of music, to augment all the senses and also to be immersive. So to be in the performance. I cannot say at the place of the performer, but you see, if you can see the hand and you can see the perspective, you completely are in the performance space. So we can talk also about the performance space, to include the audience into performance space and to really experience, in my case, contemporary music, because one of the challenge of my activity as a concert pianist is to bring contemporary music to the public, and so the audience can really start thinking on how to put their mind in listening contemporary music, because contemporary music needs to augment the imagination, and so to give them a new code to understand this music.
Yeah, I think it's exciting to see where we can take the virtual concert hall, the virtual performance, and maybe they can be, in some senses, more real than our palette of choices that we had, well, maybe from last year, and maybe maybe this will accelerate some of these ideas. I think the research that you're all doing is maybe a little sort of light at the end of the tunnel in terms of creating more meaningful experiences for audiences when physical interaction is going to be hard for quite some time, it's likely. So I'd just like to thank you all again for your wonderful presentations. I know you put your email addresses on your slides, but I'd certainly like to continue conversations with you all, and if this was in a real place, and perhaps with the eclectic watch party, I'll have a virtual pint to continue these discussions later on. So thank you very much. It's a real
Thank you all of them.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.